Thank you to those of you who are joining us today. Me and my team will be presenting our case study on Capetown, South Africa, and the water crisis that they had there a few years back. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Day Zero crisis that existed a few years ago, and today I'm here to explain a little bit more. Today I'll take you through some of the background, some of the major concepts, especially the governance structure, which is so important to understanding the crisis, and the actual case of Day Zero. So how did Capetown get there? What did they do? And where are they today? I'll also take you through a little bit of planning for water security in the future, as well as some challenges and recommendations that have come up. In order to understand the crisis that happened in Capetown, first we need to learn a little bit more about Capetown itself. So Capetown is located in the southern portion of South Africa, pretty much where the southern Atlantic and Indian Oceans meet, and it's located on the ocean. Capetown is surrounded by mountains, and it's a city of about 4 million people, and there's about 2,500 square kilometers. Capetown experiences dry summers and relatively wet winters, and this is where rainfall is super important for supplying water. Average rainfall is a little over 500 millimeters, and the region has a vast amount of biodiversity. In order to understand the water situation in Capetown, you first have to understand the geography and where exactly the water comes from. A lot of the water that is used in Capetown sits in these mountain catchments that are mostly rainwater fed. The potable water sits behind 6 dams, which you can see in the map beside. And the water breakdown in the area comes down to 29% goes to agriculture, about 7% to small towns, and about 64% goes to Capetown households and businesses. Capetown and the surrounding towns and irrigators are served by the Western Cape Water System, which is owned by the City of Capetown and the Department of Water and Sanitation. In order to understand the water situation in Capetown, I think it's really important to understand the governance structure that's going on. Firstly, at the national level, we have the African National Congress, and this is the ruling party. This is the majority party for South Africa. And the other big institution that we should look at is the Department of Water and Sanitation, the DWS. And that's because they're in charge of the bulk of infrastructure and regulatory control. They actually are the ones who have the right to allocate all the water from the 6 big dams that we talked about earlier. Next, at the provincial level, and we're talking about the Western Cape provincial government here, is ruled by the official opposition to the ANC, and this is the Democratic Alliance, the DA. And they have more of a role of playing at the provincial level and making sure that municipalities are talking to one another and that regulations are being followed and whatnot. And lastly, we have the local level, and this is the actual city of Capetown. And the city of Capetown has very little control over the funding and like the larger actors, but they also have quite a bit of responsibility. The city of Capetown is responsible for all the conservation efforts. They're responsible for keeping track of the water supply and making sure that people pay their bills, and recycling and supply. So now that we understand a little bit more about Capetown's background, as well as the governing structures and frameworks and all that stuff, we can finally talk about the infamous Day Zero. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Day Zero. It was in the news a lot back in 2018. And basically, the way Day Zero was portrayed and what Day Zero was the day when Capetown would literally turn off the water taps and people would be unable to access water. And this is the point at which the dam levels would fall below 13.5% capacity, and water would be limited to 25 liters per day. So how did we get to this point? This unthinkable breaking point where the city was literally threatening to turn off the water. Well, things like this don't happen overnight. And day zero was the result of a 3-year drought starting in 2015 with a dry, hot summer and extremely low winter rains, followed by a moderately dry winter in 2016, giving the reservoirs little chance to recover. This culminated in record-breaking low rainfall in 2017, which by one analysis was considered a 1 in 600 year drought. The city had planned for a 50-year drought, but nothing like this. Dam levels went from 93% in 2014 to 23% in 2017. The DA, the Democratic Alliance, the ruling party of the area, continuously ignored warnings from its scientists, engineers, meteorologists, and the public, who questioned the dam's infrastructure and ability to support the city for years to come. The Department of Water and Sanitation did not restrict water usage in 2016 or 2017 for the agricultural sector. This lack of precipitation extended into 2018, where in January, the city announced day zero would occur in 3 months, giving its citizens literally 90 days notice that they would be shutting off the taps. You see, day zero was the point at which the dam levels would fall below 13.5%. Anything below 10%, and you're not able to access the water because there's too much sediment in the water and you just can't use it. At this point, residents would have to collect water from 200 different distribution points and were limited to 25 liters per day. All of this was a massive disaster. And part of it was, yes, the drought that was occurring, but a lot of it also had to do with the politics of the area. You see, the African National Congress and the DA were bitter political rivals, and during the crisis, they blamed each other for not preparing for the future adequately. The Department of Water and Sanitation blamed Capetown for not preparing adequately as well. And this bitter infighting that had lasted through the years was part of the issue for not properly preparing, as well as the rapid escalation of the drought. So after all the political squabbling was over, and all the political parties had blamed each other for their inaction, what did the city of Capetown actually do? Well, one of the first actions that they turned towards was water restrictions. From November of 2016 to February of 2018, the city of Capetown imposed increasingly strict levels of water restrictions, as seen in the graph to the right. Another thing that they turned towards was they developed a critical water shortages disaster plan, which included 3 phases. The first was water rationing, which you can see in the graph to the right. The second was disaster restrictions, so this is day zero, make water last 3 months before 10% capacity, and the last was full-scale disaster implementation, when all surface water would run out. Other things they turned towards was increasing the severity from level 3 to 6B. And basically what this is level 3 is about 800 megaliters of water, which was in 2016, and over time they ramped it up in 2018 so that people were only allowed to use about 500 megaliters a day. But one of the issues that they had with this was that in the survey conducted in January of 2018, it was found that only 55% of the people in Capetown were actually complying with these restrictions. Some of the other water restrictions that they turned to was restricting agricultural supply to 60%, basically telling farmers that, they were going to have to forfeit some of their water to the city because the city was running out of water. Some of the other things that they turned towards was flow regulation. Water management devices had been used to manage debt associated with water bills, and this was used to monitor households and target users who were above 10 kiloliters per month. They also increased step tariffs, which also targeted people who were using more water than was allotted for. Another method of attack that they used was the city of Capetown launched a massive communication campaign. They used infographics on conservation, municipal and media messaging, public maps presenting weekly water usage, and houses within limits rewarded with a green dot. And basically what this was there were public maps, and if a household was using under or at the amount of water that was allocated, they would be rewarded with this little green dot that would be publicly viewed as a sort of social pressure to make people comply with the water restrictions that were in place. Other things that they did was the city released detailed information on, how much water you were using. So, how much water would one flush of a toilet use, or how many liters would a 2-minute shower consume? How does a household detect leaks? These were all tactics using information to help consumers of water understand and how much water they were using. So on top of all the other measures and actions that they were taking, one of the other actions that they took was pressure reductions and consumption regulation of water. So they decreased flow pressure to limit water loss to leakage. And basically, this is, if you push the water through the pipes at a decreased pressure, then you're likely to limit the water loss. They expanded the water management devices and targeted users above 10 kiloliters of water per month. They increased step tariffs, now charging for free basic water, although it's important to mention that they did allow for free water up to 6 kiloliters of water per household. And actually, the water management department would cut off the water supply after a certain amount, and this led to complaints from people basically, saying that the meters were not showing correctly how much water was being used. But this was one of the methods that they used to limit the amount of water that was being used by households. And one of the last things that they turned to was augmentation projects. So, even though it wouldn't help for a while, the city invested in aquifers, desalination plants, temporary wastewater treatment plants to reuse water, were all methods used to try and increase the water supply. Another thing that they did was they eventually took from the agricultural supply, setting restrictions at 60% for agriculture in order to gather as much extra water as possible. So, what was the result of all these actions? Well, with the combined efforts of conservation, water diversions, and eventually moving into winter rains, Day Zero was postponed indefinitely. Winter rains in 2018 resulted in dam levels returning to 72%, and the government was able to move water level restrictions from 6B, which is about 50 liters per day, to level 5, which is about 70 liters per day. So, after all of this, where's the city of Capetown today? Well, in November of 2020, just 4 or 5 months ago, the Western Cape's water system dams reached 100% capacity, and the city of Capetown lifted restrictions and lowered tariffs. However, permanent water use regulations are in place. These include regulations on outdoor water use, efficiency of appliances, swimming pools, car washes, and construction sites. The city projects, indicating that dams are unlikely to drop 50% by next winter, and this is through many of the regulations that they have put in place, as well as the upcoming forecasts that they have projected. Additionally, in response to all of this, multiple plans were made in order to ensure the water security for the future. As we can see, the city of Capetown produced its own water strategy. The first was safe access to water and sanitation, working with stakeholders and building trust. The second, wise use, so incentives for efficiency use. So we're talking about those appliances and whatnot that we mentioned earlier. The third, sufficient reliable water, so adding additional water sources, going back to the aquifers and the desalination plants that we had mentioned. 4, shared benefits with regional water resources. So that includes stakeholder and sphere and sphere of government involvement. So, trying to loop together different levels of government so they act in better coordination. And 5, water sensitive city by 2040. And this includes diversifying infrastructure updates, regulatory mechanisms. The Western Cape also developed its own sustainability water management plan from 2017 to 2022 and include 4 different goals. The first goal, enable effective cooperative governance and institutional planning for sustainable water management, basically aligning leadership, engagement of stakeholders, integrated governance structures, and basically making sure that, all these different levels of government are working effectively together. The second goal was enable sustainable water resources for growth and development. So, this is diversifying water resources, tapping into those aquifers, preventing leakage, the metering of water, and incentivizing conservation of water. The third goal was enable the integrity and sustainability of socio-ecological systems for climate change and resilience. So basically protecting and restoring the ecology that the water and the watershed sits in. The fourth goal was enable effective and appropriate information management and reporting awareness raising. So basically this is a part of their information campaign. So consistent monitoring and quality of water, promoting awareness through communication, and, reaching out to the public and whatnot. And lastly is the national plan. So the Department of Water and Sanitation Strategic Plan, which is coming from a national level. And their goals are similar to those outlined by both the City of Capetown as well as the Western Cape. Protecting, developing, conserving, managing, and regulating water resources, building skills and capacities, providing leadership, and managing and regulating the efficient and effective use of water and sanitation services. Basically in the aftermath of the Capetown Day Zero, all levels of government kind of came together and put forward these plans, and in many of them they acknowledge, many of the mistakes that they made, including the lack of communication between different levels of government. So after looking at many of the problems that face Capetown, as well as their approach towards solving these issues, as well as many of the plans that came out from different levels of government, we came up with our own challenges and recommendations for Capetown. First was the uncertainty of climate change and population growth and economic development. Capetown has seen rapid growth in all of these areas, and climate change is definitely a huge concern for the area due to the drought risk. Another challenge is the lack of national support for municipal governments and poor collaboration between hierarchical levels. As we saw, you've got all these different levels of government that are kind of in each other's way, and on top of that, you have this massive political fighting that really steps in the way of progress. And the last thing that we didn't really discuss a lot, but is a major issue, is the inequalities in access to clean water and sanitation. The legacies of apartheid are extremely apparent in the city of Capetown, and reflected in that is definitely unequal access to clean water. Some of the recommendations that we had proposed, though, were to diversify from engineering and infrastructure solutions and natural disaster plans. Another was better define government responsibilities and cross-level collaboration. This is one of the key issues, as we have discussed before. Another recommendation was be more proactive, coordination and transparent communication with the public. All of these things, were extremely lacking in the days leading up to Day Zero for years. And the last recommendation was recognizing the inequalities of water pricing and building trust with communities. One of the reasons why the people didn't listen to the government was because Capetown is famous for shutting off people's water when they can't pay their bills. And that kind of, gross negligence towards what is considered a human right by, almost everyone, is part of the reason why there was a lot of this miscommunication and mistrust between the public and the government. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation, and please send us any questions or comments that you may have.